Countdown. Can hear me now? All right. Welcome to the Great American Mail podcast week in review for it's the week of May the 14th, 2022. This is the podcast where we break down all of the biggest stories of the week. At the end of this podcast or live stream or whatever this is, you will be caught up on all the news of the past week and give you sort of our interpretation through the lens of the law, the Constitution, and history. We have a daily podcast. I will update the link when this live stream is over. And if you want, you'll have we'll have a link tree to all of our different places that you can get our content. We do a daily podcast. This is basically the best stories of the five podcasts of the past week. We do a daily podcast. So without further ado, let's get started here. One of the biggest stories, and we go in reverse chronological order. So we're going to go from Friday backwards. So one of the biggest stories that we covered, and I actually decided to cover it yesterday, but it broke a couple of days ago, and it was basically about the fact that Lindsay had been caught on a hot mic after January 6th saying some things. Let's take a listen to what Lindsay had to say there, and let's go. Sorry, folks, I'm out of practice here. Let's take a listen to what Lindsay had to say, and I'll come back and tell you why a lot of people are misinterpreting this.
We come out of this thing stronger. Moments like this reset. It take a while. People are calmed down. People are, I don't want to be associated with that. This is a group within a group. And what this does, there'll be a rallying effect for a while where the country says we're better than this.
And Biden will help that, right?
Yeah, totally. He'll be maybe the best person to have, right? I mean, how bad can you get it with Joe Biden?
So a lot of people caught this and were covering it in a way saying that it just shows that these people, a lot of the people on the left, are trying to attack the Republicans to say, see, they really think January 6th is bad and Trump is bad and there's a bunch of stuff that's bad in the Republican Party, and this just proves it. And then a lot of people were trying to show that Graham was a traitor and things of that nature. And honestly, I don't think either of those are the proper take. The proper take here is among many things. But the proper take here is, first and foremost, we have to remember back then, a lot of us, we saw that everybody was sort of horrified by what happened. And we didn't know then what we know now. We didn't know then, for example, that they would fail to release thousands and thousands of hours of video. We didn't know then that we know now that the FBI refuses to say if they had infiltrated it. We didn't know then what we know now about what happened in Michigan, where the whole thing was a setup. We didn't know then, and we know now, that they would treat the January 6th defendants like they're in a gulag and deny them the constitutional rights. I could go on and on and on, but the point is, when he was making those remarks, it was in the fog of war, and so we don't really know exactly what's going on. But the other big thing, and let's pull back up the thing there, the other big thing you'll see there on the screen right here is the fact that down here, he's saying totally he'll be the best person to have, right? I mean, how mad can you get at Joe Biden? Now, a little bit of this is the fact that Lindsey Graham spent, decades in the Senate. Well, actually, he may not have spent decades because Graham was he was a congressperson and then ran for the Senate. But he'd been in the chamber up there in the Congress for quite some time, and he knew Biden since before he was the vice president. And so a lot of that is a little bit of history there. But the other big thing about this story, why I think a lot of people miss the point and why you're here, is the biggest point people miss is a lot of people thought Joe Biden, we didn't necessarily think he was going to be moderate. I mean, Biden has kind of a record of going and being whatever he wants you to be, right? And going out there and doing whatever the party needs him to do. So we didn't think he was going to be moderate. But nobody thought Biden would be essentially Bernie Sanders part two. Nobody thought that. Everybody thought, well, it's Joe. I mean, he calls it, he puts a lid on it at noon. He's not going to mess things up. He's just going to stand there and just be happy to be president. And in fact, he has presided over some of the worst policies in American history. So I thought that was really the bigger story of the week there. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot to catch up on that. But the second biggest story of the week continues on the theme about January 6th. And I'll put a link. If you go to our link tree, you'll see in there we've got a lot of articles at our Substack page, GreatAmericanMail.substack.com. I'll put a link in the description. You can check it out. But we've got several articles on January 6th. And a lot of people don't know that January 6th is a couple things now. First and foremost, it's the rally that got out of control, okay? And there's definitely that component of it. But the other big thing about January 6th, and we got onto this, I believe, December of last year, when Mark Elias tweeted out about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And so we're going to talk a little bit more later in the show about that because it comes into play with respect to Marjorie Taylor Greene and some people that are trying to be kept off of the ballot. But the interesting thing about January 6th is this January 6th committee is in this other component, and that is when Trump was going to the Electoral College on January 6th, what he was trying to do was deny certification of Biden's electoral victory, right? And you've heard a little bit about that, and we're going to talk several times in the show about this, and I'm probably going to do another YouTube video just exclusively on this issue and combine the things that we've done at our Substack page. But anyway, so one of the things at January 6th that we've learned is, in addition to the rally that got out of control, and in addition to Trump challenging the certification process, is you've got this January 6th committee, which is combining both of them, right? One, we want to make a big deal about the rally and the fact that people were out there and got out of control. Number two, we want to make a huge deal about the fact that Trump was challenging the certification. Now, before I get into this video that I'm about to play for you of Eric Swalwall talking about this second issue about the going after the certification and them subpoenaing various people, I want you to understand, that, again, taking us back to where we were. In January of 2021, Trump had filed a bunch of lawsuits, right? And almost all of them had been dismissed on standing grounds. Now, as an attorney, I can tell you, if I've gone to court, and they tell me I don't have standing, that means they're kicking me out before I get to discovery. I haven't had a chance to lay out my, do some discovery, find the evidence, and lay out my case. It seems to me that at some point I'm going to come to the conclusion, well, maybe this isn't the right place. Maybe the place to go challenge this is the certification process. Anyway, if you want to know more about that avenue of how January 6th works and how the certification process works, go to our Substack page. We've got several articles up there. And again, I'll put a link to one of them in the description afterwards. But let's take a look here at our friend Eric Swalwall over at MSNBC. And he comes on. There's a couple things in this bite that I want you to hear, but just give you a little bit of a flavor. Take a listen.
Swalwall is a Democrat from California. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee, and he joins me now. Congressman, I don't think anyone would deny this is a very big, significant step. What is your reaction to it?
Shouldn't their oath have been enough?
And I'm sorry, I should have set this up, folks. He's basically talking about the fact that the January 6th committee now has issued subpoenas to 5 people in Congress, including Kevin McCarthy, Mo Brooks, and some others. And this is all but what I was telling you about, is that Trump was going to challenge certification on January 6th. He had, I think, 8 senators and 100 Congress people ready to challenge it. And so that's part of what they're developing here. The January 6th committee is saying, hey, what were you talking to him about? What was your plan on certification or challenging certification? Anyway, so he's reacting to the subpoenas having gone out. Take a listen.
Chris, every citizen's responsibility when they witness a crime is to cooperate with authorities. This is the greatest crime against the Constitution we've ever seen, the most amount of arrests ever for a single act. And these individuals have information. And so shouldn't their oath to the office that they serve when they raised their right hand and were sworn in on January 3, just 3 days before the insurrection, shouldn't that have been enough? And it clearly wasn't. They were asked to come in voluntarily. They refused to do so. And drastic times call for drastic measures. This was a day that we
just stopping real at this point. And again, this idea that, hey, we asked you to come in voluntarily and then you're free. I will admit, as an attorney, giving somebody the option of accepting service or just coming in voluntarily is a little bit of a courtesy. But the point is, this committee doesn't have any authority. And the reason it doesn't have any authority, you don't have to be an attorney. You don't have to have read the Constitution. You have to just be a citizen. It is a legislative branch. And he keeps talking about investigation and crime and all this stuff. You understand, and again, I'm not forgiving it, but at least if Trump had been certified the elector, and his DOJ was refusing to look into January 6th, I mean, you still wouldn't have a point because you still don't have a criminal authority. But at least you'd have a point going, well, no one's investigating it. But Biden has the DOJ. Nancy has the Capitol Police who've already investigated. Biden has the FBI. Biden has the CIA. What in the world does the House need a committee to do this? He's talking about desperate times, desperate measures. That's all false. That's not true at all. But anyway, he continues. They've been subpoenaed, and he continues.
Nearly lost our democracy, our freedom, our right to vote and have that vote mean something. And if they don't want to cooperate, then we're going to have to press them with legal subpoenas.
Now, folks, I'm going to get in a little bit later in the show here today. We're going to talk exactly what he's getting at. But what he's getting at is not so much the people with the zip ties and the Viking helmet. He's not talking about those. He's talking about the fact that Trump had a plan to challenge certification, all right? And that plan is the coup. That plan is the insurrection. That's what he's talking about. And that's why they're trying to get McCarthy and other people to come testify. Anyway, he's going to make one other point that I want to really make sure you hear. This is just astounding when he makes it in just a second. But anyway, it continues.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the don't make a threat you can't back up question too, right? So now there's legal subpoenas issued. You know, if those subpoenas are safely ignored, as appears to have happened with, say, Mark Meadows, right, who was subpoenaed, was cooperating, stopped cooperating, was criminally referred to the Department of Justice. Nothing has been forthcoming. We don't know why that is, but it hasn't happened. Do you vitiate the power of the House to enforce its subpoenas if that's the situation you end up in here?
Well, Chris, again, if they're not going to honor the subpoena, then I think the committee's already shown that they're willing to keep pressing forward. So that could mean, yes, a civil case, go up the courts with a civil case, or it could mean a criminal referral. It could also mean a referral to the ethics committee. I think they have a number of options, but most importantly, if they don't honor it, it means that they have something to hide. It's an inference of guilt, and in a civil case, it would be used against them.
So again, this type of an inference of guilt is astounding to me. I mean, not only do they not have the legislature or the criminal authority to do this, the idea that if you don't want to come in, that you somehow are guilty. I mean, this is astounding. And this is the modern Democrat Party that's been taken over by the left. In fact, it looks like we're going to get to Eastman here. So, and this is the modern Democrat Party. I mean, just one thing after another. The fact that you've got a legislative branch of government doing executive branch things. The fact that you've got a select committee that's operating in secret, never happened before, just like the impeachment that happened in secret. These are banana republic show trial types of things. And, Eric Swalwall can sit here and say desperate times, desperate measures. That was 15 months ago. Nobody's storming the Capitol. Joe Biden was installed as president. Like, what's he talking about? And the other norm there, in addition to the inference of guilt and no longer innocent until proven guilty. I mean, think about the idea that he's breaking yet another norm. How do you go down and engage in, negotiation for legislation with people who literally want to bring you to subpoena and want to throw you in jail if you won't go along with their first in the American history type of committee that's doing something that's not even legally proper? I mean, it's just astounding. And again, people like Swalwall, this is the thing. You got people like Pelosi that knew how things were supposed to work. She took over. She broke all the norms. Now, Swalwall is about 41 years old. I mean, imagine how far things are going to go when he gets to expand them. So the other big story of the week, and you saw a sneak preview of it a second ago. So a new batch of emails from John Eastman were released. And so this is something that we write about on the Substack page. Again, I think we've got 4 articles, soon to be 5 or 6, that are up on our Substack page, GreatAmericanMail.substack.com. I'll put a link in the description. But if you go up there, you can read about some of these. And one of the interesting things about this, and this is Kyle Cheney here. This is a Politico reporter. And it's interesting. What happens is the January 6th committee, and there's a little bit of background here, but Eastman was one of Trump's lawyers. So they had to go to litigation out in California court. They got a very favorable leftist judge who basically said, "Oh, there's no attorney-client privilege here." So then you get all Eastman's documents, and then the January 6th committee just selectively leaks them. So there'll be a leak in week 1, there'll be a leak in week 2, there'll be a leak in a couple weeks, right? I think their hearings are starting in June, so I guess they'll have to finish their leaks by then. But what they'll do is they'll just slide a bunch of documents to Politico. By the way, a felony. I mean, Swalwall there, who's so concerned and so loves the January 6th committee. What about the fact that they're leaking documents to the press, which is a felony? Oh, he doesn't care about that. Oh, that's no big deal. Anyway, so they'll lease these documents. And what I wanted to show you here was the fact that if you look at these documents that are being leaked and that are supposedly having all these great things in them, what you'll see down here, if you look, so for example, they're saying, that this is a revelation. Well, first and foremost, it's not a revelation of anything. All right. First and foremost, we knew all of this probably in November, December. Here's why. Because in the lead up to January 6, 2021, you had to let the Electoral College people know, and there were 7 states, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan. I'm probably going to leave one out. Doesn't matter. All the 7 swing states, they all sent alternate electors, right? And before you could do that, they had to sit down. Rachel Maddow talked about it a couple of months ago. It's everywhere. But you had to sit down. You had to come up with alternate electors. You had to mail in certified mail to the Electoral College that you were going to send them there. You had to line up the people to challenge it, all this stuff. So everybody knew at this time that the 7 swing states, right? In this particular case, I believe we're talking about Wisconsin, but that these 7 swing states were going to be there. We're going to be challenging the certification on January 6th. That was the whole idea. That's why we know that Donald Trump didn't want any violence on January 6th, because as soon as the violence started, they had started this process with Arizona, and as soon as it started, it got set aside because of the violence, and so they never got to go through with it. But anyway, so these selective leaks, this particular leak happened midweek, and there's nothing to see here other than, yes, Trump did not think the election was constitutionally conducted. Yes, he was going to challenge the certification of Joe Biden at the Electoral College. Yes, he had 8 senators and I think 150 or so other people to object. And the way the process works is if there's an objection, then they retire to their 2 respective chambers. And when they do that, they discuss it. I think they have to have a minimum of 2 hours of debate. Then they come back. And it's a little bit of cloudy how he was going to pull it off at that point. But I think the idea, if you listen to Steve Bannon and some others, is that the idea was that they would get a lot of press coverage, and potentially Vice President Pence would refuse to say some of the electors. And if they couldn't get all that worked out in the lead up to January 20th, then the House would have to elect the president. And Trump would have won that, because if the election goes to the House, the way it works is 1 vote, 1 state. So even though California has far more Democrats, they still only get 1 vote. So the advantage, very small advantage that Democrats have in the House would be vitiated, and it would basically be based on states, and Republicans control the majority of the states. Anyway, so I want to highlight this one portion down here that's significant where I'm moving the cursor. And it says, for example, depending on how many ballots were counted after they were received, or that were received at the statutory deadline, say 10,000 for example's purpose, those 10,000 votes need to be discarded. And you can take the absentee ballot ratio for each candidate in those counties that were late received ballots were illegally counted, deduct. Anyway, you get the idea. You can see that. The point that they're making there, and this was part of the Navarro long memo, which again, if you go up and look at our Substack page, we talk about that as well. The point that these people were making is these states, Wisconsin was one of them, that had Republican legislatures. Pennsylvania was another one, right? They have Republican legislatures, yet they have Democrat executives, right? The governors. And the governors were basically changing the way that elections were supposed to be conducted. So, for example, in this case, counting votes after they were received, after the statutory deadline. So the Trump position was, well, that wasn't a constitutionally conducted ballot and needs to be tossed out. And the decision on whether to do that, because the Electoral College and the Constitution says that legislatures are supposed to decide the presidential electors, that they could make those decisions. Anyway, there's not really a lot to see there other than the Democrats continuing to push this narrative. And so there's really 2 points here. We'll get to the second one in a moment, but you need to understand what January 6th was about, right? Challenging the certification through a legal mechanism, right? And then part 2, you needed to understand that these continually breaking stories aren't breaking stories at all. I mean, this is just another basically rehash of what we already knew, all right? And that was that President Trump was going to challenge the election certification on January 6th, and it didn't go through. So another big story out there that broke this week was a lot of people were talking about it midweek, that OAN had settled its lawsuit, and because they settled its lawsuit, they ran a video. So let's take a look back at the screen here. So you've got Katie Fang, a favorite of mine. On my Twitter feed, we follow people from the left, the right, and everywhere in between. And we're basically right down the middle just because we need to know what everybody's thinking. And so here's typical leftist viewpoint of this. Is amazing what a lawsuit can do to force outlets like OAN to tell the truth. All right. Well, let's listen to I'm going to play the commercial for you here. Share the screen. It'd be helpful if I did that. Here we do. And here we go.
Fauci, Stacey Abrams, and the media. They all came after us. But I was listening to Georgians. Parents.
We now provide you with this updated report from Georgia officials. Take a listen.
Georgia officials have concluded that there was no widespread voter fraud by election workers who counted ballots at the State Farm Arena in November 2020. The results of this investigation indicate.
Now, if you want, you can follow the rest of that. But the main point here is Katie Fang and to tell them the truth. Listen, all they said was that there was no widespread election fraud by 2 workers who counted inside State Farm Arena. That's a very specific claim. And you'll remember those were the 2 women that had basically, they looked like, they were basically, when I was in a big law firm, we used to call them banker's boxes. But they were big boxes and they had ballots and they were putting them up under one of the tables, right? And they basically, a lot of people said, hey, that could be fraud, that could be fraud. And a lot of news outlets, including OAN, ran with it, and they claimed that they were defamed. They sued, they settled. I think they also sued Giuliani, and I can't remember who the Kraken was, but whoever she was that was saying that she's got so much evidence it's coming out through a water hose or all this stuff. Anyway, she's still in the lawsuit. So the first and foremost thing is OAN is not admitting there wasn't widespread voter fraud. They're just as to that specific instance. And when you heard it there, the whole sentence taken together, no widespread voter fraud by 2 people at State Farm Arena, it's clear. Anyway, the other thing that was important here legally is this is a common litigation tactic is you settle with one party. So say you sued 5 people. You sue OAN, you sue Giuliani, you sue the Kraken, and you sue, let's say, 2 or 3 other more, whoever's in there. And then eventually you get a little bit of money from one person to help fund the litigation. You get favorable. You got that little video there that you can now use. Say, hey, even they're admitting that wasn't true when you said it, right? And you've also got a friendly witness going forward. So there's really nothing to see here other than, again, the left just continuing to repeat nonsensical talking points that don't really add up. So let's share the screen again here. So the other big news this week was Nina, and I could have used several of the Nina Jankowicz things, this new Ministry of Truth czar. I did a bit of research, and we talked about her several times on the show. So anyway, what's incredible about this person is not so much the fact that she's gotten this position. I mean, just like Swalwall we were talking about earlier, it's amazing to me that in America we've gotten to a point where, and again, I think this violates the First Amendment. It says Congress shall make no law, right? And so that basically means the government shouldn't be in the regulation of speech. And so I think basically coming in and what she's talking about, the Ministry of Truth regulating or adding content is regulating the speech. We'll see where the courts go on that. But the other interesting thing as it relates to someone like Nina Jankowicz is, and if you ever read the book called The Road to Serfdom by Hayek, he talks in there, he basically has about 14, 15 chapters talking about many things about why leftist government, socialist, communists don't work. And one of the things he talks about is that one of the reasons they don't work is people who are given these types of power will attract the wrong type of person, right? So if it's someone like me or you, and you say, hey, listen, will you run the Ministry of Truth? Will you go in there? We would try to roll up our sleeves and go in there and say, okay, what's out of bounds, what's a little bit too far, what's not really false, we would try to do our best to just be fair about it, even if we didn't agree, right? And unfortunately, we're not the ones that are attracted to these positions. Unfortunately, it's people like Jankowicz, right, who want to go out there, who want the power, and they just don't have the proper temperament. And so I want you to listen to this little video here, and I want you to think, when you hear about this, I want you to think about anything she's saying here that is remotely improper, right? And consider why she doesn't like it. It's just speech she doesn't like. But there's nothing dangerous about it at all. But anyway, take a listen. Here's Ms. Jankowicz. Midweek, this video kind of surfaced about her explaining what is disinformation that is a national security threat. Take a listen.
That's false or misleading information that uses gendered tropes. So it might be, for instance, this is a big one that we tracked in the report, Kamala Harris slept her way to the top. Or it might be that Jacinda Ardern, another one that we found, is actually a man. So we might see racist tropes about, name it. I mean, Ilhan Omar is a favorite for this sort of racist sexual rhetoric that's compounded. The idea that she married her brother to immigrate to the United States, for instance. But then we see racialized narratives, things like Kamala ain't black, hashtag Kamala ain't black is one that we tracked. Things that are saying that she's not black enough, she's not South Asian enough to claim that heritage. Same thing goes against AOC. So rather than write the word bitch, they will use an exclamation point instead of an I, or they will use visual memes to avoid textual detection. So one of the things that I get pretty frequently as a woman in my 30s without children is I get sent pictures of empty egg cartons, which are meant to remind me that my fertility is waning. That those same narratives about Kamala Harris, about other candidates, about women in general in the West were echoed in domestic Russian disinformation.
So anyway, it's interesting. Again, just to make the temperament point again, folks, I mean, think about it. You know, she could have, it was bad enough. And at the end, she had to bring herself in, right? I mean, imagine being a person who's been given that much power at 33 years old, being put of an agency of that size. And then she can't really understand, you know, Nina, it's really not about you. I mean, if you don't like this stuff and you want to go after it because it's happening to you personally, I mean, I sort of sympathize, but be smart enough. I mean, do me the courtesy of not making it about you, right? You're not running for any office, right? And again, notice how everything, she calls it national security or somehow it needs to be regulated. That's normal speech. That's normal political speech. I mean, I've made the point several times on Twitter. I haven't made it in quite some time, but there are a lot of so-called quote unquote black leaders who, you know, aren't black in the traditional sense. I mean, if you really want to go out there and say, you know, I want traditional American, black Americans to get to these positions, that's one thing. You know, I mean, you can agree or disagree with that sentiment. It's fine to have it, you know. And so if people don't like the fact that Kamala claims that she's black, even though she's, you know, she's not from a traditional black American family that were slaves and has other mixed type blood in her, that's up for people to vote to make a decision on that. I mean, Barack Obama is constantly said to be the first black president, but he had a white mother. I mean, this is all part of political discourse, right? I mean, anyway, I mean, I'm not trying to say, I mean, if Obama wants to claim he's black or Harris wants to claim black, it's not something I engage in, but it's not something that we need to be going around policing. And the last thing on that is, and this is just beyond the law and beyond the history and beyond the Constitution, but, you know, why is it any of their business how people want to decide? I mean, she says, I send this and it's meant to be this. Is she a mind reader? But anyway, so another big story of the week was, again, the Supreme Court leak continued. And if you don't know who Nina Totenberg is, you should. So Nina Totenberg has been covering the Supreme Court, I think, for 40 some odd years. She's been doing it as long as I've been following politics. And I've been following politics since I was about 6 or 7 years old. So, and she was covering it back then. And she was out there and interviewed this week and as to the leak and about the court. And look, you have to understand, Nina Totenberg is like a lot of quote unquote journalists out there. And she's been this way for a long time. She's extremely leftist. She covers the Supreme Court from an extreme left point of view, again, which is fine. The only thing that bothers me about that is if you're going to cover the Supreme Court from a leftist point of view, just be upfront about it. But instead, she, you know, masquerades as some, you know, middle of the road journalist out there, right? Anyway, so she was discussing the leak, and for me, the biggest part of the story was this part right here that she talked about. Take a listen.
That has never, ever occurred before.
She's talking about the leak.
Only, in all likelihood, have come from a justice. That I think is less likely. Perhaps one of the clerks, and the leading theory is a conservative clerk who was afraid that one of the conservatives might be persuaded by Chief Justice Roberts to join a much more moderate opinion. And then there's another theory that it was an outraged liberal clerk.
So the reason I covered this on the show, and I thought it was so important, is this is the subtle way in which these leftist journalists just continue to gaslight us. Okay, there's a great book by Glenn Grosclose called Left Turn, and his point is that because all of the news that we get gets filtered through this left-wing filter, that we don't even have an accurate portrayal of what left and right is. So take, for example, guns, right? The only news we ever hear about guns, they're causing violence, right? And so if that's the only news you get. You don't get the actual news, which is sometimes they cause violence, sometimes they prevent violence, right? Sometimes they're good. When you only get the left-wing view of it, you necessarily lean to the left a little bit. And so that's what Nina Totenberg constantly does with all of these things. So, folks, the idea, there is no leading theory that it was a conservative clerk or a conservative justice. And I'm going to break that down in a minute. There's no such thing. She's completely fabricating this. So she's claiming it's a leading theory. And because she has, her, reach at ABC or NPR or wherever she's working now, she's able to claim this theory and mean something. But I want you to back up and think about this. Is it the conservative wing that is constantly doing, strange things to break traditions? I mean, she said there have been leaks from the court before about how an opinion might come down, but no one's ever gotten an actual opinion before. This takes a person that lacks compunction, right? It takes a Nina Jankowicz. It takes someone like her who seems to think that the rules don't apply to her. It takes a Nancy Pelosi, somebody who thinks, oh, well, you know what? I can create a January 6th select committee. I mean, so what? It's never happened before. It's no big deal. I can impeach the president twice, even though we've never done it unless we had bipartisan support. Oh, we can conduct the investigation for the impeachment. Oh, and by the way, January 6th. Oh, we can do that in secrecy. I mean, folks, think about this. In the United States of America, that didn't happen. Go back to Watergate. I mean, everybody came in every morning, and they had the hearings, and they sat the witness down, and the entire United States of America, as well as the people on the Democrat, Republican, Socialist, Independent, whatever, they all heard from the witnesses at the same time. Pelosi, on the other hand, no, we're not doing that. So Nina Totenberg expects us to believe that it was a conservative clerk that broke all these norms and all these rules. And then think about her opinion about why. That somehow you're going to... So her theory is if we leak the actual language, the actual opinion, somehow John Roberts, the Chief Justice, will be able to go in there and pick off one judge to stay with him so that you wouldn't have a majority opinion saying Roe is overruled. Right? And when we do the show during the day, people they just love the law stuff. So let me explain to you how this would work. So hypothetically, probably in all likelihood, there are three that are willing to uphold Roe versus Wade, right? That would be the three leftist judges, right? Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, okay? Then you've got, presumably, if it was a majority opinion, then you've got Alito plus the three Trump justices plus Clarence Thomas, right? And then you've got Roberts, in all likelihood, either joining on to that opinion or writing his own opinion, which would be a so-called concurring opinion. So just so you understand how this works, once the judges have been fully briefed, once oral argument has happened, they go in and they do what's called a caucus. And at that caucus, at the end of the day, they discuss, hey, anything you want to say about this, anything you want to bounce around. When they're finished caucusing, they then take a vote, a little straw vote. And if the Chief Justice is in the majority, he decides who writes the opinion. If the Chief Justice is not in the majority, whoever the most senior justice is decides who writes the opinion. So in this particular instance, this is why we think that probably Chief Justice was not in the majority, because he likely would have selected himself to write the opinion. I'll get to that in a moment. Now, if it breaks down the way we think it did, which is the five, Alito and Thomas, plus the three Trump justices, then the most senior judge would have been Clarence Thomas, and then he would have selected Alito to write the opinion. That makes perfect sense there, okay? Now, let's assume that Roberts is sort of in the middle. He's not going to sign on with the leftists and say Roe v. Wade is fine, right? Just leave it the way it is. He wants to take a more moderate position and say, well, we're not going to overrule Roe in its entirety. We're going to scale it back and say it was wrongly decided and the trimester system doesn't work and the undue burden system doesn't work. But we're going to guarantee the right to an abortion under some other mechanism that he's going to come up with, right? That's kind of the idea where they're going, right? And the idea is if he's in that sort of middle ground of saying, we're going to still let you have abortion for a certain amount of time, but we're going to say Roe's not good law. It wasn't well reasoned, right? How in the world would he pick off another justice by releasing the opinion, right? I mean, you understand, whoever this clerk is, they've already seen it. It's already been circulated, so they've read it. So whatever the argument's in, they don't need to release it to the public so that Roberts can see that. right? It just the whole thing just doesn't make any sense at all. What is most likely to have happened here is that, again, leftists who don't care about tradition, they're not worried about that. They just decided, you know what, we're just going to leak the opinion and let these people see the outcry that people are going to have. And maybe, now this I do believe, they probably thought if there's enough of an outcry, one of the justices will then run over and get in sort of a middle position with Justice Roberts there. And just so I won't leave you hanging on this, here's the way if that were to happen. So let's just say after the leak, and we don't know where they haven't ruled yet, so we don't know where they're going to go. But let's just say hypothetically, Amy Coney Barrett says, you know what, I've seen the protests. They've been outside my house. I'm done with this. I can't do it. And she runs over to Justice Alito and says, take my name off that opinion. Now you've only got 4 justices, right? You've got Alito, Thomas, and you got 2 Trump justices, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, right? So then you've got Roberts and, say, Amy Coney Barrett saying, we don't like Roe and we don't like Casey and they were wrongly decided, but there is a right to an abortion for, say, 8 weeks under this, right? All right. And then you've got the 3 leftist judges who are saying that, you know, Roe v. Wade and Casey are fine. Here's the way that would be interpreted. The way you look at it is, since you don't have 5 saying any one thing, you would have to look at, well, you've got these 4 who say, yeah, we don't like Roe v. Wade and it's bad. And then you got these 2 that say, oh, well, you do have an abortion up to 8 weeks. And so the quote unquote majority consensus then would be abortion would be right up into 8 weeks. And so it would soften the blow as to having 5 people just saying, we're getting rid of Roe, we're sending it back to the states. So anyway, we don't like covering the abortion stuff here, but we thought this was sort of an interesting story out there. So a couple of things. So here, let me share the screen again. So other big news out there this past week, and actually I think it broke last Friday, but the judge who was hearing a challenge to Marjorie Taylor Greene being on the ballot, and let me bring up the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. So let me, again, I'm going to put a link. We got a couple of, I think 4 articles at our Substack page about this. But the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution is one of the Civil War amendments. The 13th outlawed slavery. The 14th guaranteed the rights and privileges and immunities of citizenships to all persons, regardless of race, creed, etc. And then the 15th Amendment guaranteed black citizens, the right to vote. So anyway, the 14th Amendment is divided into 5 sections, and before really too long, so Section 3 had been kind of an afterthought, but you can see it here, and I'll read it. It says, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or any executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But anyway, so basically that says if you engaged in an insurrection or gave aid or comfort to anyone who engaged in an insurrection, you are not eligible to be a member or run for any state or federal office, essentially. Okay. Now, this next sentence is very important. It says, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Now, this was passed in the aftermath of the Civil War. What had angered so many people, basically the Republican Party at that time, was after they reconvened and they had won the war in April of 1865, and then they start to come back, into the legislature. Here you got these people that you were just fighting with, and they're sitting in there in the Congress with you. So they threw that into the 14th Amendment. And there were actually 2 amnesties. And let me pull up this last sentence here again. This last sentence here that we're looking at right here. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3, twice. And again, I don't want to get into it today because it's a little bit long-winded. Again, we've got a Substack article we'll link to. But twice Congress removed that disability. They basically got rid of it. And so no one really ever used it again until the early 20th century. I think there was a communist or a socialist who was trying to run, and they tried to use it then, and it basically had remained dead and buried. In fact, now that I'm talking about it, let me see if I can pull up my Substack page. And here you look down, we covered it in, where is it? Here it is, right here. We covered it right here. So this is the article, the first article we wrote here, A Democrat Coup, Part 1. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is, and here it is right here, this Mark Elias tweet. Oh my goodness, he got rid of that tweet. Oh, that is so great. That is so great. Anyway, So here's Mark Elias's tweet. You can see it right here. So he tweeted that in, looks like December 21st. My prediction for 2022, before the midterm election, we will have a serious discussion about whether individual Republican members are disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment from serving in Congress. Go back to there it is right there. And I wrote that Substack article that we're looking at right here. It looks like I got it off in 9 days there. And I'll put a link in the description. Again, you can read that article if you want. But I was horrified that Mark Elias was going to be doing that. But sure enough, he said it in December of 2021, and they've now challenged Madison Cawthorn, they've Matt Gaetz, they've challenged Marjorie Taylor Greene, and a bunch of other people. And this was in Georgia happened. The judge issued this decision, as you can see here on the 6th. I think it got published after we had done our podcast that day, is why I got into last week's. But anyway, so a group was able to challenge under a Georgia law Marjorie Taylor Greene's qualifications, and I won't bore you reading the whole thing here, but they basically challenged her ability to serve based on that, claiming she was part of an insurrection. Now, a couple things that are important here, and you have to understand, going back to the 14th Amendment here. So typically when you have legislation or amendment, this is a constitutional amendment, what you have to do is Congress then has to take that and then pass a law. So with this authority, they pass a law that says, it shall be here. One shall be hereby unable to run for state or federal office if they shall have engaged in an insurrection. An insurrection shall be defined as blah, 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 blah. So when you leave it to people like Mark Elias here, okay, and again, this is our Substack article, you leave it to people like Mark Elias. He was Hillary Clinton's chief counsel in the 2006 campaign. He's, one of the leading, we got a couple articles about him on our Substack page as well. He's one of these people that's not interested in the law at all. He's out there just trying to rig the system any way he can. And so he's the one that thought about using this to go after people. Eventually, somebody did go after Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, Taylor Greene did a lot of things in this particular case. She argued first in the district court in front of Judge Totenberg, who coincidentally is the sister of Nina Totenberg we were talking about earlier in the show, and she refused to give her relief, right? Because what a lot of people were saying, and I think is proper, is first and foremost, again, going back to the 14th Amendment here, it's not self-executing. There's no law here. I mean, you can't, as a citizen, go, well, I'm reading the Constitution and this person's ineligible. I mean, Congress has to pass a law saying that, right? The second thing is, it has always been thought, and if I go into it, and if you go read the Substack article, that's one of them that talks about the amnesty acts, 2 of which where Congress removed this quote-unquote disability, up until that point, it was commonly understood people were prosecuted. So, in other words, you couldn't just say somebody engaged in insurrection. President Grant and his various people in the government were going and charging people under this, saying, hey, I'm hereby charging you with an insurrection. I'm going to get you convicted. And when you're convicted, you'll be ineligible here. And when the Amnesty Act passed, President Grant, following through with what the spirit of everything went, told people to drop those cases. But anyway, coming back to the point, Mark Elias tried to do it. And the law that was used here is one that's really more of being able to challenge somebody. Are you old enough? Are you truly a citizen of Georgia? Things that are determinative, not something like were you part of an insurrection? But anyway, the judge did get the decision right. I've flipped over now well into the decision, and basically he goes through all the different things that came up at the hearing. He then gets to really the evidence, and here you can see quite succinctly the difficulty with challengers' theory is the lack of evidence, whatever the exact parameters of the meaning of engage as used in the 14th Amendment. And assuming for these purposes that the invasion was an insurrection, challengers has produced insufficient evidence that show that Representative Greene engaged in the insurrection after she took the oath of office on January 3rd, 2021. Then he continues down here. There is no evidence to show that Representative Greene participated in the invasion itself, right? And then there's no evidence that she issued directives or helped people engage in the insurrection. So basically, by virtue of the fact that they just lacked evidence, he found that, and again, the way it works is this is a recommendation he gives to the Georgia Secretary of State, who is also a Republican, and so we would expect him to follow this. He didn't have to follow it, so if he'd come to the opposite conclusion, he wouldn't have to. But I covered this as a very important part. Even though we got the right answer there, the problem is that we still have people out there now who think it's okay to challenge certain things, in improper mechanisms. And so Mark Elias has once again gotten away with it. I mean, this whole challenging people under the 14th Amendment is inappropriate because Congress has never passed a law. Number two, if it has any power at all, you need to be convicted in a court of law, or certainly at least charged with insurrection, which she has not been, right? You've also got to get through the hoops of the 2 amnesties, which they weren't able to do. And so the fact that this thing went forward at all is sort of a travesty. And this is how you lose the rule of law. This is how you lose freedom. This is how you lose the Constitution, bit by bit by bit. And people like Mark Elias know it. So let's go back to the screen. The last big case of the week was, and I'm not using that right. Sorry. Let me get over here. Here we go. All right. So was a case that was thrown out of court in the Southern District of New York here. So this is the case of Chinese American Civil Rights Coalition Incorporated versus Trump. This case, again, I think it was decided and made its way through the news late last week, the week prior, but it got bumped to this week because I'd already done the podcast. And so it's interesting. This is a Clinton judge, appointed judge, but he got it right. And it was, it's down here you can see, it's John G. Codall. And it's he gets it right. He dismisses it before it allows it to go forward. And so one of the things that you need to know about these types of cases is the first is it was dismissed. Okay, so when a case is filed, when you file a lawsuit and you serve it, a party has, and this is a federal case, so a party has 30 days to answer. I'm sorry, 20 days. You have 20 days to answer in the feds. In state court, you have 30 days, in Georgia at least anyway. And you have 20 days to answer. And in the feds, if you want, you can file a so-called motion to dismiss. And at that point, the court assumes everything you said in the complaint is absolutely true. The court cannot look and go, this isn't true, right? You have to assume it's true. And then you go, if it's true, do you have a claim, right? So the best example I can give you is the tort of dirty look. Let's say I filed a lawsuit and I accused you of a dirty look, and I said, and you said, or I accused you, and then I said I was very, very hurt by the dirty look that you gave me, and I suffered damages, and I had to go to a psychiatrist, and here are the bills and all that stuff. The court would assume all that were true, right? They would say, okay, you got a dirty look, and you were really hurt by it. It sounds strange, but whatever. They have to assume all that's true. But the problem is we're going to dismiss your case because there's no tort of dirty look. At least now you can still look at people within a dirty way, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's just freedom, right? So that's the way that would work. So here they accuse Trump of defamation largely because of the term China virus and Kung flu. Now, I never believe Trump did say China virus, but I never believed the whole Kung flu thing. But the judge got it right, and I thought it was important to cover it. So the first problem that they had in this lawsuit, and you'll see here on the right, the judge is talking about it, is in order to state a claim for defamation under New York law, and basically New York follows the common law on this one, a plaintiff must allege, among other elements, a statement that is of and concerning the plaintiff. Now, there's a problem, because when he's saying the Kung flu, assuming he said that, or the China virus, which he did say, right, the court has always had a rule that if it can be basically about 20 to 25 people, it varies by jurisdiction, then it's not of or concerning that particular person. So how can you personally be insulted, right, if he said it about a bunch of people? And so you'll see here, the court talks about the group libel doctrine thus defeats the of and concerning element of defamation. The group libel doctrine can be overcome only by showing that the circumstances of the publication reasonably give rise to the conclusion that there is a particular reference to a member. So the court's saying, hey, unless you can show that when he said that, right, that he meant you, right, you're going to have a problem, right? And so that basically defeats the claim. And this was an important story because really for a lot of reasons, right? And the main reason is that this type of thing is what the Democrats are basically all about these days. Is they basically take things that are, really, I mean, not even really about policy at all. I mean, no matter, first we were calling it the Wuhan virus, then it was the China virus, and then we had to call it SARS, COVID-19 or whatever. And this whole idea that somehow people are offended by the way that we've been naming viruses for hundreds and hundreds of years is silly, right? But setting that aside, the fact that a group of Chinese people who are association of Chinese people, which is fine, but they should be out there trying to promote the good and benefit of Chinese people. And instead, they're going on witch hunts against President Trump, right? And again, the reason I pointed out that it was dismissed early on, in other words, the court says, hey, we'll take everything you say at face value, right? But there's no case here. They knew that. They have lawyers that can tell them that, right? This is not something that was odd. Why did they want to waste their money to do that, right? Well, because they don't really care about the people that they're supposed to be representing, and they don't care about the Constitution, right? I mean, and the thing is, when I was growing up, we used to say, we were told as kids, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? Well, they're teaching people the opposite now, and it's not doing anybody any good. Anyway, it was good that the judge followed the law in this case, because the judge denied the dismissal and then let the discovery go forward. This thing would have continued to be a distraction, and it would have encouraged other people to sue over silliness like this, right? And there was a lot of other elements about that case I didn't want to get into, just because we got to keep the show to a certain level here. So anyway, if you've enjoyed it, tune back in. We're going to be doing these probably every Saturday around this time. I'll put a link up on Twitter, and I'll put a link up on our Substack page. And we're going to try to be more regular about this. I'm sorry. I know we got off to a slow start because basically we got demonetized and we had to go in and appeal it, and we got that taken care of. So hopefully we'll be a little bit more regular about this. But if you liked it, check out the link in the show. Please subscribe, tell some friends, share it with people. And if you liked it, I hope to see you next week.